Hello everyone, welcome back to Debating for America's Youth. Today I'm interviewing an awesome guest. Today I'm interviewing the NSDA National Champions in Big Questions debate, Michelle Ma. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So just to begin, for those who don't quite know what Big Questions is, could you just briefly explain the event to the people?
Sure. So Big Questions is a relatively new debate event and it's supported by the Templeton Foundation. So unlike most debate events, which are focused on policy or action, which is like what you should or shouldn't do based on the current events and like the status quo and its impact on the status quo, BQ is more about complex worldview questions. So questions about the nature of reality and like humanity. So for example, this year the resolution was resolved, objective morality exists. So in terms of format though, it's similar to public forum in that there's two sides, a pro and a con, and there's like alternating speeches where you go, you're constructive, then rebuttals, then final focus and summary.
That makes sense. So what's your process for researching for big questions? Because it's not like a traditional policy, like I guess debate like you talked about, how do you like find your research or your data to be able to support your case during your competitions?
Yeah, so NSDA actually provides some great resources. They have an evidence file as well as sample AF and NEG cases. So I usually start by reading those and seeing what kind of ideas that the researchers have had for like arguments on the topic. And after that, I branch out and I look at the ideas that I specifically liked, and you'll find a lot of articles on the internet about these topics because they have been like discussed in various fields from philosophy to religion to like science. And also, I usually actually like to read a few books on it. For example, for this specific topic, I read The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris, which I cited as part of my AF case. Because these are such like large, overarching topics, it's really helpful to read a few books to get a better sense of what previous researchers have had and like their ideas on this specific topic. But in general, it's pretty similar to PF, which I normally do. You just research on the internet and you can come up with cases and ideas that way.
That makes sense. So obviously you've competed like at the highest level at NSDA Nationals. How do you stand out to the judge with a pool full of really great competitors?
So competing in Big Questions, I've noticed that a lot of these debaters come from backgrounds in like policy, LD, or PF. So they try to do like a line-by-line style, but then it starts to become problematic when you have to go into in-depth explanations because it's really logic-based and you have to overcome a lot of the judges' like preconceived notions about the topic. So they end up getting bogged down in defense explanations and they don't have a lot of time to come back to their case. So what I try to do to like differentiate myself, I guess, is just leave like 45 seconds at the end of each speech, come back to my case and explain it from top to bottom like really thoroughly. Just provide this clear narrative that the judges can vote off of because I think that that narrative is what they're really looking for, and sometimes it's more important than like frontlining or going over every detail of the flow.
Yeah, this topic of I guess having like a narrative in your piece has been something that I've actually heard from I guess the Lincoln Douglas champion, the Public Forum champions, and now I guess from you, the Big Questions champion. So that's interesting. I guess that really like having a strong narrative and something to connect your whole case is something that like can really help you stand out and really help you win.
For sure.
So when you're competing in Big Questions, what is your practice like? Do you practice against like scrimmage against other people? Do you practice reading over your case? Like how did you practice in the lead up to nationals?
So normally there's like a week and me and the other people who are doing Big Questions in nationals would like meet up at the school, at like my school, and we would run practice rounds. But obviously that wasn't possible this year. So mostly I just did practice by myself. I would read my case like you said, and I guess I would look at practice cases that the NSDA has provided sample cases, and I would do like practice rebuttals. But in general, I think that a lot of the practice skills that I have in PF, which is my normal event, they carry over, so that was like really helpful.
Makes sense. And in terms of like using the NSDA resources, did you notice a lot of people stuck like really heavily to the NSDA resources? And if you had a rebuttal to that, you could kind of like I guess rebut what they had to say because they're only going off what the NSDA gave them?
Um, I think that some people did stick with like NSDA cases, but I think it was kind of, they altered it a lot. But I did see a lot of the same arguments come up over and over again. For example, in the negative, it was really common for people to go for like cultural relativism and say that different societies have different morals, and so that means that objective morality can't exist. I definitely saw that in like a lot of rounds, and so it did become a lot easier to rebut it because I was able to use like the same responses and search up new responses. So I would definitely recommend that people they like formulate unique cases that people won't have responses to necessarily, so that you can extend your narrative more cleanly.
That makes sense. And I guess how do you, I guess, stand out in the questioning periods and big questions? Do you have any questions that like I guess that you use throughout the time, or do you just base your questions off of like what you're hearing in the person's speech?
I usually just base it off what I'm hearing in the speeches. There's not really like stock questions that I have because I think that every case is different, and if you want to create the most effective questions, then you should look at like specifically what is wrong with their case and try to get them to maybe admit these things without them knowing it. So you can ask questions that they might like kind of agree to because it's common sense, and then make them recognize how their case like goes against this kind of common sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, and then in terms of answering questions, I guess like how do you prepare for those hard questions and answer them when you're in the round?
So I try not to concede to anything because usually if they're trying to make you say like yes or no to a simple statement, they'll like twist it around to try to use it against you. So instead I try to deflect by going towards my own narrative and explaining how that relates to the question rather than giving them a simple yes or no, which might lead you into a trap. But in general, I think that if you're well prepared and you have a lot of front lines on your own side, you'll be able to also answer the questions as well.
That makes sense. And then in terms of like for since Big Questions is a relatively new event and especially becoming more popular, like I guess recently, do you have any advice for someone who's just getting started in Big Questions debate, like a novice in Big Questions debate?
So it's similar to other debates in that you should definitely learn more about presentation because presentation still is very important even at the very highest levels, like speaking fluently. But in terms of research, you should remember to look at like larger, like broader scale narratives. So instead of trying to hole into like specific pieces of evidence, I guess, you try to usually only do a few arguments and try to flesh these out really carefully as you're preparing. So it's better to have depth of research rather than like having a breadth of research, as I've usually found. So if novices do want to get into this event, just remember to try to look more deeply into things because in the end of at the end of the round, like you'll usually be looking at just a few arguments, and there's a lot of stock arguments that people are using. So having a deep argumentation on these kind of arguments rather than knowing everything about like all these unique different arguments, which is what you would probably have in like PF or policy, it's a lot more advantageous.
Makes sense. And then in terms of, I guess the final question for this interview is, do you have a message for the speech and debate community? Like anyone who's watching, do you have anything you would like to say to them? I'll tell you that some people took this question in the form of like things that they would like to see the speech and debate community improve on, and others just took it to thank the speech and debate community. Do you have anything you would like to say to all those watching this interview?
I would say that no matter who you are or at what level you think you are at, you should definitely be more confident in yourself and try to pursue whatever it is you want to do. Because some people kind of were not really discouraged me from doing BQ, but they kind of thought it was like less of an event because it was so new. But I was really interested in the topic and the topic areas that it encompassed, so I just pursued it. And I never would have imagined that I got here, but I did. So I think that if you are just new to speech and debate, you should just try to be as confident as you can in yourself and just pursue whatever you want, no matter like what people around you are saying. And just have faith in yourself that you will accomplish your dreams. And if you put your hard work in, and if you really believe that you can go wherever you want, then you'll be able to achieve it.
Well, that sounds awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your advice, especially as you talked about in such a new event. And so I'm sure a lot of people who are getting started in Big Questions can be helped by this interview. So thank you.